All right, well, are you ready? Let's jump in and pray to start out tonight here. Lord, thank you for another night, for a beautiful, unseasonably warm November day. We thank you for that blessing and pray that you'd bless our time in your word this evening. Help us to behold more of who you are, who you've designed us to be, and how to live in this world that you've given us. I pray you'd help us to see those things in your text this evening. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we're looking at Song of Solomon this evening, and Song of Solomon, a lot of people are maybe not familiar with the contents of the book. They know it's about love, they know it's about marriage, but it's actually one of the best and most poetic books that we find in the canon of the Old Testament. And many people have heard the Song of Solomon and not realized they're actually hearing the Song of Solomon. I don't know if you recognize who this is. This is Ernie Harwell. Ernie Harwell was a baseball announcer for 55 years. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame as an announcer, and he has the distinction of being the only announcer who was actually traded for a player. So they needed a catcher, and so they traded their announcer for a catcher, and so he's a good announcer. And he's also well known for whenever spring training would begin, he would start out by reading this portion of the Song of Solomon to start his broadcast. He would say this: "Lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers appear on the earth, and the time of the singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land." Those are familiar words. Do you recognize those from the Song of Solomon? And so that's how he would begin every broadcast for the Detroit Tigers for spring training for, I believe it was 38 years he announced for the Tigers on its own. And so the Song of Solomon, incredible amount of poetry. Even, baseball fans probably have heard Ernie say that for decades and not realize maybe that it's from the Song of Solomon. As we jump into the Song of Solomon, one thing we got to recognize is as we're describing the song here and the contents of the book, we're not going to be overly graphic in the way we're describing what's happening here, because the poetry of the song is intended, in the words of MacArthur through Phil Johnson, the poetry of the song is intended to be like a modest dress that covers something beautiful. And so we're not going to be ripping that off. We're going to let it be what it's intended to be, covering something beautiful. So that's what you can expect as we dive into the Song of Solomon this evening. So a couple notes first as we start moving in. We got to remember that we need to study the Old Testament in order for our soul to thrive. We can't be Christians with half a Bible. It takes a whole Bible to make a whole believer. And so that's why we need the Old Testament. And we've seen these 4 reasons flesh out and play out over the course of our time together. The Old Testament galvanizes our trust in the character of God. We see that God is good, and he's always good. He was good, he is good, he will be good. It's the same God all throughout the Bible. We want to glean wisdom from the pitfalls of the past. There's some pitfalls that Solomon and his young bride seek to avoid in this text, and we can learn from that. It's to give us a desperation for Jesus, to help us to see our need for Jesus, and also to grasp some of the promises that are fulfilled in Christ. And so those are things we're going to be looking at as we look at every one of these books in the Old Testament. And I want to remind you, too, of our 3 core questions. Every book, we're asking these 3 questions. First question: who is God in this particular book? The Bible is a revelation. It reveals God to us. That's what we're looking for when we read the Bible. Jesus Christ, he's the climax, the apex of all creation and of God's inspired word. And so how does this book point us forward to Jesus? And then lastly, how does this book fit within the story of salvation, the story of God redeeming for himself a people? We're going to look at those things through our text today. Now, we're in the poetic books, and so we saw through Job that life is suffering, and so we know that suffering is not an interruption in life. It's something that happens to all of us in life, and so how do we suffer well as followers of Jesus? And so we saw Job's longing for the mediator, Jesus Christ. Psalms reminds us in every moment in life we're to worship the Lord, and so how do we worship the Lord well in the ups and the downs of life? The book of Proverbs helps us to apply God's wisdom, the Creator's wisdom, to every aspect of life. And then Ecclesiastes. Now, my dad changed my outline for Ecclesiastes if you were here last week. But he's the doctor. I'm just a wannabe doctor. So we're going to go with his outline. He has life is vanity or vapor. The word there, if you remember Dad talking about that, Solomon, when writing Ecclesiastes, it's his lament at the end of his life for the mistakes he's made. And he says, I tried to find meaning in all these different ways, but it was like vapor. It was like trying to catch smoke. It slipped through my fingers. That's what that word vapor, havel, means in Ecclesiastes. And so how do we find true meaning in life? It's only found in the Lord. And now we're in the Song of Solomon, and it's describing life as love. And so what is this thing, love, that the Lord has given us? So that's what we're looking at in the Song of Solomon this evening. All right, so here's where we're at in the canon of the Bible, in the Old Testament. Again, the blue books, that's the narrative spine. That's the main storyline, the main timeline we're following. And so Song of Solomon, written by Solomon. So it's right here in the period of 2 Samuel and 1 Kings is roughly where that's going to be written. So 971 BC, roughly around that time frame is where the book is written here. So I've got that for you on the next slide here. Song of Solomon, written by Solomon. Now, you've probably heard some call it the Song of Songs. If you look at chapter 1, verse 1, it says, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Now, there are some commentators you'll come across that will say it's an attribution. It's written in honor of or to Solomon. But I'm convinced, based on the Hebrew scholars I've looked at, I'm convinced this is an attribution of authorship. That's probably the argument you saw in your MacArthur Study Bible as well, that Solomon is the author of the song. And this makes sense for a number of reasons. One, it clearly and vividly describes Solomon's young love. It has to be Solomon or his bride to be able to describe it in this level of detail. Another reason we would look at it this way is the dating of the book lines up with the life of Solomon. It's written during the United Kingdom of Israel. It describes going from Jerusalem up north to the northern region of Israel. After Solomon, the kingdom was divided. If you remember the story of the Old Testament, Solomon's son Rehoboam was a foolish son. And so he didn't listen to his father's wisdom in the book of Proverbs. And so when Rehoboam took the throne, he was trying to decide how to handle the grumbling of the people. The people didn't want to have to undertake great projects like they had under Solomon. Solomon built the temple. He built great works in the city. If you remember Ecclesiastes, all the things that Solomon describes building in that book, he made a lot of things. And so the people said, are you going to work us hard just like your father did? And so Rehoboam goes to his father's counselors, and the counselors say, if you're kind to the people, if you're gentle to them, they'll serve you all your days. But if you're harsh with them, the people won't follow you. He goes to his young counselors, and they say, you need to be hard on these people. It's your first days as king, and they're already asking for relief. No, you need to come down hard on them and let them know who's in charge. So Solomon listens to his young friends and not the old wise counselors. So Rehoboam listens to his young friends and not the old wise counselors. And he goes back to the people, and he says, my father scourged you with whips. I'll scourge you with scorpions. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. What's he saying? I'm going to lay a heavier burden on you. I'm going to be harder on you than my father. And this results in the northern kingdom breaking apart. That happens early on in the reign of Rehoboam. And so, based on the context of the book here, this is written during a united Israel. So it has to be during the lifetime of Solomon. So those are just a couple of the reasons why it appears Solomon's the author, in addition to the attribution of authorship here in chapter 1, verse 1. So it's probably written in the early days of his reign because it's covering his marriage to his first bride. And it's kind of shocking. We'll talk about this at the end. It's kind of shocking to think about all the brides that Solomon took on after expressing such love for his first bride. But this is written for his first bride. And this is likely the mother of Rehoboam. And so that would mean that it needs to be Naamah, who's the mother here. So it pertains to the relationship of Solomon and Naamah, the Shunammite or the Shulamite. And so reason being, the oldest son got to take the throne. Rehoboam is Solomon's oldest son, and Naamah is his mother and one of the young brides of Solomon. So it's most likely that it's Naamah who's the bride in question here. There's some commentators, and MacArthur probably mentioned this as an option too. Some commentators say that maybe one of the Pharaoh's princess daughters was the person that's being described here. But when you look at the context here, later on we'll look at this in the book where Solomon and his bride go back to her hometown. They go north to northern Israel. They don't go down to Egypt. And also, this bride seems to look at her tan skin as a drawback. And so that seems likely for an Israelite woman, but for an Egyptian, they're all going to have tan skin like that. So a couple reasons why. Is that helpful? Just trying to frame up the decisions, why do we put it as Solomon and Naamah here? So that's the book, the authorship, the storyline that's taking place. And a couple other things here. It's written like a poetic play. And so there's lots of poetry. And so it's important as we're going through, we'll point out different features, different scenes that are happening. Because if you catch the scene in your mind, then you understand why the people are saying the things that they're saying. And it's veiled in poetic language, so we'll unpack some of that as we go through. But Solomon and Naamah, his young bride, are central to the drama. It also includes speech from 3 other individuals. We see the daughters of Jerusalem speak here. We see that God himself speaks in chapter 5, verse 1. And also Naamah's older brothers speak in the text. And the main thing we got to catch is that marriage is a blessing. It's ordained by God, and it's intended to be a blessing for us. It's not meant to be a burden. It's meant to be a joy. That's what we got to catch from Song of Solomon here. Now, when we talk about this book, throughout church history, many interpreters take wild interpretations of the book of Song of Solomon. They'll say it's figurative. It's about Christ and the church. They'll say it's about God and Israel, and it's not about Solomon and his bride. And so I love what Henry Morris says in this regard. He says this: the most obvious interpretation is no interpretation at all. That is, it is simply what it purports to be, a romantic love poem describing the love of young Solomon and a Shulamite maiden who became his first bride. So we're going to take it at face level. It is what it says it is, that it's a story of love between Solomon and his bride. And if you remember when we were talking about figures of speech, we pointed to Roy B. Zuck, Dallas Seminary. He talks about this. We default to literal interpretation, right? Unless we have good reason to abandon what it literally says, we're going to take it literally. So unless literal is impossible, is it impossible that it's about Solomon and his bride? No. It's actually very likely. Is it absurd that this would be about Solomon and his bride? No. Would it be immoral? No. And so there's some explanatory statements that tell us there's poetic figures of speech describing the relationship, but the relationship itself really is what's being described here. And that's what the author intends when he's writing the book. When we think about why this book was written, do you think in Solomon's mind he's thinking, this is about Christ and the church someday? Probably not. He's probably thinking about, I'm going to record God's design for marriage. One man, one woman for life in this committed relationship, and the beautiful gift that is. That's really what the author's intending to communicate through the text to us today. And so MacArthur says it this way, and this is in your study Bible, page 846, you can see there. A more satisfying way to approach Solomon's song, right, in contrast to some of those figurative, symbolic interpretations, is to take it at face value and interpret it in the most normal historical sense. And so we use the historical grammatical method. We look at the text, we try to interpret it, take it at face value. So does that make sense on the interpretation side of things? Any questions on that before we jump in? Yeah.
Couldn't it be bride?
Yeah. That's a great question. The question is, could it be both? Could it be literal, and then also God have more meaning in store? And so I think the book itself, God probably doesn't intend for this poetic book to reveal Christ in the church, but marriage is a picture of Christ in the church. And so it's a step, but yeah, you're right, that marriage is a picture of Christ in the church, but we just wouldn't take that and impose it on the text and say, okay, so Christ says to us, we wouldn't take it that way. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's kind of a buffer, a firewall there, extra step. But you're right, that ultimately, every good marriage ought to point to Christ in the church. Yep, good observation. Other questions on that, how we're interpreting the book? It's about Solomon. It's about his bride. It's about love. Yeah, Joel. Yeah, so the question is, since we know how the story ends, that Solomon takes on 700 wives, How are we supposed to take this? I'll have more on that in a moment, but the short answer is human beings are sinful and sinners do foolish things. And so after we get done with the story and we see how beautiful this love is, we'll see really how foolish Solomon was to do what he did. But if we remember Ecclesiastes and Solomon's lament over his pursuit of pleasure, we realize at the end of Solomon's life, he also looked back and said, wow, that was really foolish. Purpose and meaning wasn't found in this pursuit of multiple brides. But that's a great question, brother. Thank you for asking that. All right, well, with that, let's jump into the overall outline of the book. The book breaks down into roughly 4 sections. This is on page 187 in your manual with Dr. Mock. And so here's a cleaner picture to help you see that. But 4 key sections, and Dr. Mock, like a good preacher, they all start with the same letter. So we have courtship, consummation, confusion, and confirmation. And so in the courtship scene, Solomon and his bride look back on their dating, on their courtship years, their delight for each other, their waiting for the right time, and his bride has a bad dream. We're going to see that even in the ancient Near East, men were getting in trouble for their wives' bad dreams. So, sorry, I had to. Then we'll move on to chapter 3 through 5, the first verse at 5, and we're going to see their wedding day. We're going to see them enjoying God's good gift of marriage and of marital bliss. Then we're going to see the confusion. And so even this wedded bliss has tension, has difficulty, just like all relationships do, just like all marriages do. So we're going to see the trouble in Jerusalem and the love restored. And then finally, with the confirmation, we're going to see Solomon and his bride traveling back to her hometown to visit. We're going to see the exclusivity of their love and the power of their love, and a final charge to Solomon, his bride, and the people. And so that's what you can expect from the text ahead here. So what we'll do is, if you can open up your Bible, we're really just going to walk through the text this evening, just to help you see in the text the main movements of what's happening in Solomon's great song here. We know that Solomon wrote 1,005 songs based on what the author of 1 Kings tells us. And so this is likely one of 1,005 that he has written and recorded for us. All right, so chapter 1, verse 1, talking about the courtship here. Now this is a flashback to them thinking about their courtship days. His bride says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run. The king has brought me to his chambers." And so the bride here confesses 4 things she loves about Solomon. She likes his lips. She likes his love. She likes his lotion, his smell, his cologne, the way Solomon smells. And also his name. Notice in verse 3, your name is oil poured out. Therefore, the virgins love you. Now, this doesn't mean that Solomon at this point has many women pursuing him. It means many women speak well of Solomon. He's got character. He's got a reputation. And these pure women hold him in high esteem. And so, verse 4 then, when she says, draw me after you, let us run, really a better rendering of the next line would be, let the king bring me to his chambers. Her desire is for Solomon. She wants to be with Solomon. This is a good desire. And so she wants to be with Solomon. She confesses her affection for him. So we see his character on display. And then the others speak. Now this is one of those moments throughout this book, you're going to see that Solomon's bride speaks, Solomon speaks, and then there's these others who interject. And so the audience, others, say, we will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. So this is good. That's what the audience says. This is a good relationship. This is a good love. The bride goes on to say, I am very dark, but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. What is she saying? She's saying that she is tan. She's tan from the sun because she was required to help labor in the fields. And so that's why she says, I was supposed to be a keeper of the vineyards, but then she says, but my own vineyard I haven't kept. So my own body, I wasn't able to put on sunscreen and protect my body, my vineyard from the sun. That's why I'm so tan. In this society, having fair skin was thought to be more beautiful because only the wealthy women could have fair skin because they didn't have to go outside and work. It's kind of the opposite in our society. We say, well, dark skin, tan skin is beautiful, and light skin's not. And so isn't it amazing how beauty standards just shift like that? But in their context, dark skin was sought to be of lower rank because it meant you had to work in the fields. And so she's saying, don't look down on me because I'm tan from the sun, because I had to work. And then she speaks to Solomon. She wants to find out where Solomon is. And so they're remembering here the early courtship. And now that we're going to look at the rendezvous in the pasture. So she's speaking to Solomon and says, tell me, you whom my soul loves, that's Solomon, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. Okay, so Solomon is shepherding. Just as his father, David, was a shepherd, Solomon also had flocks that he was required to pasture and shepherd. And so she wants to know, where are you having your lunch break? Where are you sitting down with the lambs in the middle of the day? Where you make it lie down at noon? For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions? Let me come visit you and not these other men. Solomon's response is coy and playful. If you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents. Follow the tracks is what Solomon says to his bride here. So, follow the trail. Not very helpful. There's probably a lot of flocks that are pasturing, but this is their playful response of Solomon here, when she's trying to come find him in the field. And then he extols her beauty. I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. She looks like a horse. It's more beautiful if you know that Solomon was an equestrian. He was an accomplished horse wrangler. He brought many horses from Egypt to Israel and actually created a whole cavalry and chariot unit. And so he'd be very familiar with horses and what a good horse and not a good horse looks like. And so he's speaking from his experience and context and saying, you're like the most beautiful horse among all the horses here. So it's intended to be a compliment. And he goes on to say, your cheeks are lovely with ornaments. So he notices the earring she has on. Your neck with strings of jewels. So you look beautiful is what he says to her. So that's the rendezvous in the pasture. Now, they go on expressing to one another their love for each other. But in chapter 2, verse 1, flip over to chapter 2, verse 1. And if you're in your study Bible, you're going to see that on that page you have almost 2 whole pages of figures of speech and how those connect to Solomon and his bride expressing their love for one another. And so that's really helpful that MacArthur has that there for us, for all the local vernacular they're using to describe these expressions of love. But in chapter 2, verse 1, his bride responds in this way. Now she's feeling self-conscious, and she says this, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. Now it sounds beautiful, but a lily of the valley would be a very common flower. You'd come across a valley and it would be full of these lilies. It'd be like to us, dandelions. Almost like weeds, they're so abundant. And so she's saying, I'm not very unique. I'm just like every other flower. What is it in me that Solomon sees that I should be his bride? And Solomon accepts the premise and turns it. He says, well, if you're a lily, as a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young woman. Okay, if you're just a dandelion, every other woman is a thorn to me. He turns it and says, you're unique. You're beautiful to me, my bride. And so notice how he turns that phrase to make it a positive for his bride. And so that's them speaking to one another. And now the scene shifts. And in verse 4, we're going to see now they're sitting down at a banquet together. And so remember, they're remembering here, in poetic fashion, they're remembering their courtship. And this is the bride speaking in verse 4. And she says, he brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. So they're at a public banquet. You can imagine at King David's table. And so here is Solomon, his son, among all the other young men of the kingdom, nobles of the kingdom. And Solomon stands up at the banquet and declares his love for Naamah, the Shulamite. He says, listen, my devotion, my love is for Naamah. And so I have affection for no one else. She's mine, and she loves me, I love her. And so it does two things. On the positive sense, it expresses my desire is only for her. So all the women are thorns to me. She's the only lily, the only dandelion. She's mine, and I'm hers. And so in a positive sense, it lays out his love for her. And in a negative sense, it prunes all other loves. There's no behind the scenes sort of like, we'll text about it, but I don't want to make it Facebook public that we're dating or in a relationship status. Solomon stands up at the banquet. This is the one I'm pursuing. I'm courting her, and so my affection is for her. So all others, get lost. This is the one that I love. And for her as well. All other men, stay back. This is the one I'm pursuing. And so no other women will hold my attention or desire, and no other men ought to pursue her. And so it's an amazing statement. So she says, his banner over me, he displayed his colors, the king's colors over me. It was love. He declared his love over me. And then in verse 6, we see, verse 5 and 6, we see their desire for one another. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. I'm hungry for love is the expression. His left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. And in this moment of passion, we get verse 7 that says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. This is a theme of the book. It's repeated a couple times. But so she stands up in this moment of passion and expresses a desire to wait. And so the desire to wait here echoes the theme. A godly relationship pursues the right thing at the right time and in the right way. And so when she says, I adjure you, I urge you, I command you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does, maybe your translation says hinds of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And so why does she reference gazelles and does? Well, these are skittish creatures, easily startled, easily frightened. And so I command you by the does and gazelles, be careful, right? Be skittish, be careful when you're entering into this kind of love. It's a dangerous season of life, that engagement period, because my desire is for him, his is for me. We've declared it publicly. What's stopping us from taking the next step? And so she's saying, I adjure you, don't awaken love until it's appointed time. And this isn't some nun who's celibate saying, listen, don't you partake in that marriage thing. This is a woman consumed with passion for her husband, her soon-to-be husband, and his passion is for her. And she's saying, listen, don't spoil it. Wait for the right moment. Wait for the right time to truly enjoy this gift of the Lord. And there's a play on words happening here, where it says gazelles and does or hinds of the field. The word gazelle is the Hebrew word sebayath, which is connected to the name of Yahweh. One of Yahweh's titles is Yahweh of Sebayath, the Lord of hosts. And then the word hinds or does in your MacArthur Study Bible is Alilah Hasedeth, which means the Lord Most High. And so there's a play on words happening here. She's speaking of the animals and their skittishness. And so be like these animals, be ready to scatter at the first sign of temptation, but also remember the Lord. Remember the Lord. In the name of the Lord, do what's right. And so both these things are at play in verse 7 here when she says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, speaking to the other young maidens, by the gazelles and does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And the last part's important. Until it pleases. There's a right time. And that's the theme here. A godly relationship, it's a good thing, but it pursues the right thing at the right time in the right way. That's the important thing to catch in the text here. And so following this command, we see a bad dream that she has. And so as we keep on reading in chapter 2, she's describing Solomon. So before we get to the dream, she's describing Solomon again. So verse 8, blossoming love protected. Verse 8, once again, we're going to see it protected 2 times here. So that's the first time it's protected. Second time, right? This is their engagement period. The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. So the scene here is, it's another day. Solomon is coming to visit her. My beloved is like a gazelle or like a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall. So she's home. Solomon's come to their family estate to visit her. So he's on the other side of the wall, and it says, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice. Now, this isn't like stalker, creepy Solomon's looking in the windows. It's affectionate, right? Like throwing rocks at the window, like, hey, are you there? Are you up? Let's talk. I'm here. I made it to your town, right? He would have had to travel to get to her place here, her family estate. So he's looking through the windows of the lattice, trying to find her. In verse 10, my beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away with me. Verse 11, for behold, the winter is past. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. There's the context for that broadcaster's statement. The fig tree ripens its figs. The vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Everything's in bloom. It's the season of love. Everything's in bloom. Arise, my love, my beautiful one. Come away, O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, the cranes of the cliffs. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet. Your face is lovely. It's springtime. It's springtime. Do you know what happens in springtime? Let's go away together. Let's elope. Let's make this happen today. His desire is to take his bride now. And then she responds this way. Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. What is she saying? Let's wait. Let's not spoil this blossoming love. Let's not awaken love before it pleases. This picture of the foxes in the vineyard, why would a fox ruin a vineyard? I know that Samson tied foxes together and lit them on fire and burned down a whole field, but how would foxes ruin a vineyard? Well, foxes, if they could reach the fruit, they would eat it, and just a couple of foxes could wipe out a vineyard. But if they couldn't reach the fruit, the little foxes would chew on the base of the vine until it fell down and kill off the whole fruit before it's ripened. And so that's the picture here, is that these foxes, catch the foxes, Solomon, before they chew the base of these vines, this love that we have that's about to be in bloom, bring its full fruit. Catch the foxes before they spoil the harvest that we're going to have. That's what she's encouraging Solomon to do. Catch the foxes. And it can be seen as a command. Let us catch the foxes in our vineyard. Let us together prune these things out of our life to preserve the fruit of what the Lord is blossoming here. That's what she's describing with these foxes. Let us catch these foxes in the vineyard. And then she makes this declaration, right? This isn't a rejection of Solomon. Verse 16, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies until the day breathes and the shadows flee. So until the appointed time, turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the cleft of the mountains. Run away, Solomon, run from this temptation until the appointed time, until the right day. Her desire is still for Solomon. This isn't just a rejection of Solomon, but it's not the right time. The right timing, the right way, that's what she seeks. And then she has a bad dream. This happens often in relationships, right? You're nervous, you have a bad dream after a tense situation like this, and so the bad dream comes up. She says, on my bed by night, this is the indication that helps us see it, the dream. I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. So she's looking for Solomon, she can't find Solomon. So verse 2, I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me, and they went about the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him, and it would not let go until I had brought him into my mother's house. into the chamber of her who conceived me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And so her dream here is that Solomon can't be found. But in her dream, she finds Solomon and comes to the same conclusion that she began with. I adjure you, by the gazelles and the does, do not stir or awaken love until it pleases. So this is the first movement. And so this engagement period of time, this blossoming love, and the key thing you got to catch is they time and again recognize that a godly relationship pursues the right thing at the right time in the right way. That's the thing you got to catch from this starting period of time. And so the question I have is, and I want you to talk about this one, because they use figurative language to describe foxes in the vineyard. And so foxes meaning threats to a blossoming relationship. And so here's the question for you, and I want you to talk to the person next to you about this. What are some foxes that threaten blossoming romances in our day? So go ahead and talk about that. What are some threats to blossoming romance in our day? Go ahead and do that now. All right, well, hopefully that's helpful just to think about some of the contemporary ways that this applies. There's all sorts of directions you can go with that, but there's many foxes, which is why we've got figurative and plural language describing that. So that's the courtship period of their relationship. And so now we're going to move to the consummation. So now the wedding day has finally arrived. They've saved themselves for this moment. And now in chapter 3, verse 6, we see there is a parade on their wedding day. Now, so in our day, there's a bridal procession. In their day, we see that the groom arrives in stylish fashion. It says this, what is that coming up from the wilderness? Chapter 3, verse 6. Like columns of smoke. So many people marching, it looks like smoke on the horizon as they're tromping through the ancient Near Eastern dust here. Perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the fragrant powders of a merchant. So it looks like smoke, smells wonderful. Behold, it is the litter of Solomon. Now litter, not kitty litter, but this is like litter, like a platform with posts and a throne on it. Solomon's being carried in, and all the young men are holding the poles here, carrying him in on their shoulders. It's the litter of Solomon. Around it, now look at this description, are 60 mighty men, some of the mighty men of Israel. Remember that his father, David, had 30 mighty men. What does Solomon bring? 60. He doubles it. He's got 60 mighty men with him, all of them wearing swords, expert in war, each with his sword at his thigh against terror by night. Now, why do you have armed guards marching? I haven't seen that in a wedding processional, armed people marching. Why does he do this? It's a pronouncement of his desire to protect his bride. I can protect you against the terrors by night. Me and my 60 mighty men will protect you, Naamah. Your protection is my responsibility. Solomon here is going to own up to the responsibility of being a husband, protecting your bride. And so he's demonstrating that with this bridal procession. King Solomon, now here she's speaking of him in future. King Solomon made himself a carriage from the wood of Lebanon. Do you remember what wood that would be? Yeah, smell the cedar, right? Just like his father David loved cedar from Lebanon, Solomon here, you could smell the cedar as he's being marched in on this carriage. He made its posts of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. Its interior was inlaid with love, with care, by the daughters of Jerusalem. So it's striking, marvelous, as he marches in on his wedding day. It says, go out, O daughters of Zion, and look upon King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of the gladness of his heart. And so he's wearing a crown. Now, this wouldn't be a royal crown. Royal crowns are given when you ascend to the throne. That would have been handed to him when he ascended to the throne. This is a crown his mother, Bathsheba, would have given to him. And so it's a crown simply of honor. a token of her affection on the day of his wedding. A gift crown, not a reigning crown. But it's from Bathsheba. Remember that Solomon is the second son of Bathsheba. Her first son was lost as an infant. I remember King David weeping over the first son. And so she is his second son. And if you can imagine the hole that places in a mother's heart to lose a child. And so here's her secondborn now, who's now on his wedding day getting married. And so think of the emotion going on here for Bathsheba herself as she sees Solomon about to be wed. And it's described, the day of his wedding, the day of the gladness of his heart. It's a day of joy. It's a day of gladness for Solomon, for the family. It's an affair in Israel, a large public wedding. That's important. This is for all to see, that Solomon is wed to this bride. And then Solomon describes his bride. In chapter 4, verses 1 to 16, he's going to describe his bride as they prepare to consummate the marriage. And so chapter 4, verse 1, likely this is Solomon pulling his bride aside now after they've had their wedding vows. The feast is in full celebration and they've stepped away. And he begins to describe his bride. Now the figures of speech that are used here, there's a lot of them. And we have to remember that these are figures of speech here. Because if we take it literally, it can be a horrifying picture. It's figurative. It's a good thing that it's figurative, right? The flock of goats and the sheep nicely shorn, the Tower of David. I love the Winnie the Pooh catching some honey too from her lips. But so figurative speech, okay? So figurative speech. If you look here, he's describing her. Your eyes are like doves. They're soft and gentle. Your hair is like a flock of goats. He's describing the waviness of her hair. Her hair has been done for the wedding day. Her teeth are perfect, a flock of shorn ewes, so little lambs that have come up from washing, so they're white teeth. They're perfect teeth, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost its young. There's no hockey player teeth going on here, right? She's got a full set of teeth, a nice smile. He says, your cheeks are like halves of pomegranate. It's likely at this moment, he's describing like she's blushing. Like he sees her blushing as he's describing, he's taking in the beauty of his bride and describing how he sees her, to her. He says, he sees her blushing. Your neck is like the Tower of David. And so, not necessarily meaning that she has a long neck, but that she's got confidence. She's got posture to her. And it's got 1,000 shields around it. There's a necklace around her neck. In verse 6, notice, he says, speaking here, he says, until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go away to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. This is the first instance of the word bride in the Song of Solomon. Because now that they're wed, she is his bride. It's the first time he uses this term. And he's going to use this several times now to refer to her as his bride. But his indication here is, let's go away until the day breathes and the shadows flee. Let's go away by ourselves until morning, right? This is where the curtain draws, the wind blows, and they enjoy their time together. One thing I want to point out to you in verse 9. He says, you've captivated my heart, which we would resonate with that. Wow, that's a great statement. You've captivated my heart. My sister, my bride. That sounds weird to our ears. Why is he calling her his sister, his bride? In our culture, it's not an okay thing to say to your bride, to call her your sister. In their culture, it wasn't a statement of incest. It was a statement of affection, of intimacy, of closeness. And so it was intended to be a compliment. That's why you'll see Solomon use this a couple of times. She's not his literal sister, but he's saying, you're closeness to me. You're near to me, like we grew up together. Does that make sense? Why he's using sister there? Okay. And so another thing to notice too is as Solomon is taking in the beauty of his bride, this is not a conquest for Solomon. This is a cherishing. He's delighting in the bride that the Lord has given him and who's given herself to Solomon. And so it's a cherishing, not a conquest that's happening here. That's the beauty of godly, intimate love in this way. And so they spend that night together. And in verse 12, they describe in another figurative word that I want to point out to you. Verse 12 says, a garden locked is my sister, my bride. Again, term of affection. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A spring locked, a fountain sealed. And so why does he describe her as a garden? When we think about gardens, sometimes we think about like public parks. In those days, there are no public parks. If you have a garden, it means you're wealthy and it's behind walls. Gardens were private, and they were for the kings and the noblemen. They were for the rich. They were not for everybody. And so when he describes her as a garden, he's pointing out the purity of his bride. You're like a locked garden. No one else is permitted to enter other than your husband. And so he's affirming her chastity until this moment. And so it's a joy for him to be able to say that. You've saved yourself for me. And then she responds, look at the last part of 16. Let my beloved come to his garden. It's an invitation for the night together. And if you look at chapter 5, the last half of verse 1, in your MacArthur Study Bible, it's going to say others. But you probably have a study note that points out that this is indicated someone else is speaking. And this voice is the voice of God speaking. And he says, eat, friends, drink and be drunk with love. What does God think about this wedded bliss? God is for it. He is for this kind of love in the right context, in the right way. And so marriage here is honored by God. God's pronouncement is this wedded bliss is a good thing. It's designed by God for good. And so marriage is to be held in honor when we think of what the author of Hebrews says about this. And so the consummation, it's a beautiful moment where they get to enjoy the blessing of waiting for this day, waiting for this moment. It's a good thing. It's meant to be good. So marriage is a good thing. Passion and desire for a husband or a bride is a good thing. That's what we see here on their wedding day. So marriage is to be held in honor. So here's a question I have for you. I'll just get your thoughts out loud on this. What does it look like to honor marriage? What does that mean to honor marriage? Okay, yeah, one way is waiting until you're married for that intimacy. Yeah, it's a great way to honor it. Yeah, when you enjoy marriage, you're honoring God because it's something he's given. That's good. Yeah, unconditional love, that God's kind of love. Yeah, unconditional love is a demonstration, a way of honoring marriage. Yeah, putting the other person before yourself, that sacrificial type of loving and living. Yeah, it's a way of honoring the marriage relationship. One last one. Being faithful. Yeah, being faithful in that relationship. It's a way we honor marriage. That's great. Very good. And so we see the consummation here. It's a highlight of this book. And as we keep on moving, now we're going to see confusion. We're going to see trouble in Jerusalem and the resolve to stay committed. And we'll see in this section that even a committed marriage is not trouble-free. So even with all this wedded bliss, their relationship is not trouble-free. And so as we keep on reading, the bride here, Solomon's bride, Naamah, has another bad dream. Chapter 5, verse 2, I slept, but my heart was awake. A sound, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. Look at how many terms of endearment he throws in here. My sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew. It's raining outside. My locks with drops of the night. But then the wife says, I had put off my garment. How can I put it on? I had bathed my feet. How could I soil them? My beloved put his hand to the latch, and my heart was thrilled within me. I arose to open to my beloved, my hands dripping with myrrh. So she's bathed and gotten herself ready for bed, my fingers dripping with liquid myrrh on the handle of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and gone. So Solomon feels rebuffed here. He came to the door, he knocked, open to me, my sister, my love, my bride. And she says, well, I just got my pajamas on. I just washed my feet. I'm supposed to get up now? And then when she hears his hand, he's reaching on the lock there. Kind of an amazing, they had locks back then, right? They had keys, locks. She puts his hand on the lock, and she sees it, and she says, oh, that's my husband Solomon. I'm going to open it. By the time she gets up, he's gone. So she says, I arose. He was gone. And it says, my soul failed when he spoke. I sought him, but found him not. I called to him, gave no answer. The watchmen found me as they went about the city, and they beat me. They bruised me. They took away my veil, those watchmen on the wall. She's mistreated in her dream here by the watchmen. And then she says, I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him, I'm sick with love. Her fear here is that Solomon's trying to find now someone else. Right? In her dream, Solomon's going to go find someone else because I wasn't available for him. The daughters of Jerusalem respond in verse 9, what is your beloved more than another beloved, O most beautiful among women? What is your beloved more than another beloved that you thus adjure us? What's so great about Solomon is the women's question to him. And so now she overflows with love for Solomon. She describes his head is the finest gold, verse 11. His locks are wavy, black as a raven. He's got dark, wavy, kingly hair. His eyes are like doves, soft eyes. His cheeks are like beds of spices. He smells good. His lips are lilies. It's pleasing to kiss. His arms are rods of gold. His body is polished ivory. His legs are alabaster columns. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as cedars. He is a strong young man. His mouth is sweet. This is my beloved. This is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. And then her resolve, chapter 6, verse 3, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He grazes among the lilies. And so this nightmare, this dream, when she awakes, she recognizes, if such a thing is to happen, I'm my beloved's, and he is mine. We belong to one another. There's a mutual belonging and a mutual delight. Verses 4 through 13, once again, describe the delight they have for one another. And so we see that this is a friendship, but there's also passion and delight happening. It reminds me of the words of the poet Bruce Lee, who said, love is like a friendship set on fire. The poet Bruce Lee. Love is like a friendship set on fire. There's this passion for one another. So even in this good marriage, there's still trouble, there's still tension. And Solomon here at first, in the dream scenario, is rebuffed by his bride. And so it just draws them all together once more back to each other with that affirmation in chapter 6, verse 3, I'm my beloved's, my beloved is mine. And so the thing to note from this section is that even a committed marriage is not trouble-free. Why? Because you married a sinner, or you're going to marry a sinner, or you were married to a sinner, and they married one too. Just the reality of the world that we live in. And so even a godly marriage is not trouble-free. And so then we get to the last movement of the book. We see the journey home and the exclusivity of love. They're going to go back to Naaman's hometown, and then they're going to reaffirm the exclusivity of their love for one another. That's what we're going to see in the final movement of this book, chapters 7 and 8. So the journey home. Let's look at verses 11 to 13. They've spent the last 2 chapters we skipped over, once again extolling the virtues of one another's beauty. You've seen a lot of that, so we're going to move to the where the action's happening here in verse 11. So chapter 7, verse 11. Come, my beloved, let us go out into the fields and lodge in the villages. Let us go out early to the vineyards and see whether the vines have budded, whether the great blossoms have opened and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes give forth fragrance, and beside our doors are all the choice fruits, new as well as old, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. So here the bride speaks to Solomon and proposes a trip to the country, to her home, to spend time together there. And when they get out into the country, she once again expresses her longing for her husband. And in verse 4, she makes this statement. So verse 3, his left hand is under my head, his right hand embraces me. Once again, that's the same pose that we saw earlier when they were engaged. And she said, don't awaken love until it pleases. Now they're married. Verse 4, she says, I adjure you, daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. So when she was a young engaged woman, she said, wait for marriage. It's a good thing. Now that she's married, I'm glad I waited. It was a good thing, right? On both sides, it's the same testimony coming through the text here. describing now this trip to the hometown. Verse 5, who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? This is likely the speech of someone else observing Solomon and his bride coming now to their hometown, and they're riding on a carriage or a chariot or something together, leaning on one another. And so there's an affection of the relationship here. When I read this verse, I think about when Angela and I were first married, and we had a Buick that someone from the church gave us. It had to be jump-started in the morning. It didn't have power steering, but it had a bench seat in the front. So when we went on date night, right here, baby, right here, we snuggled together, leaning on one another. There's an affection of relationship happening here. They like being close to each other. It's not just sexual love. There's an intimacy of relationship happening. They just want to be with each other. They want to be near each other. And this is important to point out because our society will tell us that the climax of marriage is the bedroom. And the reality is, the climax of marriage is the relationship. It's the partner for life that you get. That's the gift of marriage. And so that's what we see happening here. Verse 5, second half, under the apple tree I awakened you. This is the apple tree where Solomon's eye first caught her. They're going back to maybe the spot of their first date. Remember here? Remember when you saw me here? You asked me out for the first time? They're going back down memory lane here. There your mother was in labor with you, and there she who bore you was in labor, describing her growing up in this area near this apple tree. And now describing the commitment of their love. Verse 6, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. She's describing her publicly declared mutual love. And so if you're familiar with seals in the ancient Near East, they could either come in the form of a ring or a roller here. The ring you would stamp it in wax. The roller you could roll it across wax or across ink. But it meant ownership. Whoever had the seal had all the rights that owner had. And so set me as a seal. There's a declaration of ownership in this affection, a belonging and belonging and being belonged to. There's a mutual ownership, mutual possession happening. And so these seals would only be given to a trusted companion. So I belong to you, you belong to me is the expression here. And she describes this love as strong as death and jealousy that's fierce as the grave. Our love is as strong as death. How strong is death? Death takes down the strong and the weak. Death takes down kings and paupers. Whole armies are taken down by death. Death is really strong. She's using a superlative to describe the incredible love they have for one another. And then describes it like fire. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it out. Picturing their love like a fire that even a flood can't drown out. Like when those wildfires are raging through the valleys in California and the helicopters come in with the giant buckets of water, and it looks like they didn't even drop anything on it. I mean, they're dropping like thousands of gallons of water, and the fire keeps on raging. That's the picture here of how unquenchable this love is, how much their affection for one another overflows and can't be satiated. And then verse 7, if a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. You can't buy love. And if you did, that wouldn't be love. So he says, this is priceless, what we have. And now the bride reflects on her upbringing. Remember, they're in her hometown here. And they say this. Now they describe her in this way. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? What's the description? Our sister is not yet of marrying age. She hasn't blossomed yet. And so what are her brothers going to do? These are the brothers speaking. If she is a wall, right? If she's rejects the advances of men who would have her, we will build on her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, if she's open, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. We're going to protect the purity of our sister. And then she says, I was a wall. Right? I was pure. And my breasts were like towers. But then I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. She says, now that I have blossomed, it's the right time for love. It's the right time for me to be married. And so she's reflecting back on, I am thankful that I saved myself for Solomon. She's reflecting on her chastity of her younger days, and with the testimony here of her brothers. She saved herself, and now she's thankful for it. And then she describes, perhaps, one of the ways that they met Solomon. We know that she worked a vineyard. Solomon appears to have many vineyards in this area. Verse 11, Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard to keepers. So he's allowing keepers to work the vineyard. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. So Solomon had many vineyards, and he rented them out to other landowners, to other workers to work the vineyards. Verse 12, my vineyard, my very own, is before me. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000 and the keepers of the fruit, 200. What's she saying? Solomon had a literal vineyard, and he rented his vineyard out to others. My vineyard, figuratively, my body, was only for Solomon. I didn't rent it out to others. Again, another description as she's here in her hometown reflecting on her thankfulness for this purity. And then it says, "O you who dwell in the gardens." Now the scene has shifted. They're at a garden party now. "O you who dwell in the gardens with companions listening for your voice, let me hear it." They're at a garden party. Solomon's calling out for his bride. It's almost like, "Marco, where are you, bride? Honey, are you there?" He's looking for his bride at this garden party. So there's a ton of people here. He only cares about his bride. And her response is this: "Make haste, my beloved, be like a gazelle, a young stag upon the mountains of spices." So we'll enjoy our love in due time. It's her response here. And so we see their playful affection once again. And so that's how the book concludes. They've reflected on their marriage, their early days dating. They've reflected on their engagement process, the marriage day, the consummation, and the thankfulness to see the hand of the Lord at work all throughout this. And the theme of this section is a godly marriage flows from devotion. Do you see that repeated at the end there? Time and time again, reflecting on Naamah's purity waiting for Solomon. Godly marriage comes from this. And so back to the polygamy question, because that's a good one. How do we think of this book in light of the reality that Solomon later has 700 wives, 300 concubines? And so the first answer we mentioned is simply that Solomon himself looks back with regret on this. And so in Ecclesiastes, I'm convinced it's his lament at the end of his life, that he's sorrowful, that he didn't enjoy the simple delights of one woman for life, but instead tried to find his purpose and meaning in conquest rather than cherishing his one bride. But also when we look at polygamy throughout the Bible, it's always framed in a negative context. Think of Abraham with Sarah and Hagar. Does it seem like Abraham made a good choice or a bad choice with Hagar? It's a bad choice, right? And Ishmael comes, and Ishmael, from that line flows the nation of Islam. It's a problem, right? Sorrow comes from this. You think about Leah and Rachel, both brides of Jacob. One is loved. The text tells us the other is unloved, sorrowful. Think about Hannah, the mother of Samuel. She goes to the temple and she's weeping because she's barren, the other bride is not, and so she feels unloved. She feels sorrowful. And so it's always expressed negatively, even if it's not explicitly condemned every time it comes up, like author's footnote reminder, this is still bad, like from Genesis, see Genesis chapter 2. And so it's not reiterated all throughout, but both implicitly and explicitly, it's condemned throughout. And we have to remember that in a sinful world, sinful people do sinful things. That's the reality. And so the people recorded for us here in the Bible, they're sinners just like us. Another thing to think about is, in our day, it's somewhat unthinkable because we say, how could your conscience not like scream at you after like bride number 600, stop, this is not going to give you joy. And we've got to remember too that you and I, we have the Holy Spirit in a unique way that people in this generation did not have. The Bible predicts the outpouring of the Holy Spirit on all flesh. He's going to write his law on our hearts. And so they didn't have the permanent indwelling of the Holy Spirit like you and I have. People were indwelled for periods of time. They were filled or equipped for periods of time. But they didn't have it in the same way that you and I do. And so we have that advantage over them. We have the full power of the Spirit uniting us with Christ. And so in another sense, our consciences are more sharp than theirs because the Spirit's working within us, writing God's law on our heart. It's not, God's law is not just in a book in the tabernacle, it's in our hearts now. And so when we read Solomon here, professing the joy of his first bride, and then we see later his sorrow when he pursues many other women. We got to keep in mind Ecclesiastes. Solomon tells us, I didn't find joy in that. But also, how can Solomon tell us what marriage ought to look like? Well, think about this. If Frank Abagnale, do you know who Frank Abagnale is? Greatest counterfeiter in U.S. history. And now he goes around for the FBI helping them identify counterfeits and teaching about why counterfeiting is not a good thing to do. If Frank Abagnale tells you, hey, counterfeiting is not good, you're not going to find joy in that. In fact, you're probably going to get caught and it's going to ruin your life. He's authoritative on the subject. He's very helpful because he says, don't do as I did. That was dumb. Be better than me. In the same way here, Solomon expresses the joy of one woman, one man for life. And then later on in his life, when he abandons that, he says, it was sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. He can tell us authoritatively from his experience, it's not the way to live. And he does tell us in his writings. Think about Proverbs chapter 5. It says, speaking to his son, Rehoboam, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight and be intoxicated always with her love. Here's a wiser Solomon. Don't do as I did. Be wiser than me, Rehoboam. In Ecclesiastes 9:9, he says, enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life. In your toil at which you toil under the sun. He's calling out, don't follow me in this. He's saying, I wish that my marriage story ended with Song of Solomon, chapter 8. Sadly, I did not rejoice in the wife of my youth. Sadly, I drank water from other wells and not my own well. And so that's how I would answer the question of how does Solomon tell us about marriage? He's made the mistakes. We can be wiser. We can glean wisdom from the pitfalls of the past. And so to our three core questions that we ask about every book of the Bible. Who is God in this particular book? How does it point to Jesus? And how do we see the story of salvation in this book? How would you answer the first question? Who is God in this book? Yeah, he's the designer of marriage. God is the one who made marriage to be a good thing. It's good. Wedded bliss is good. Great answer. Other thoughts on how we see God in this book?
I think it was love precious.
Yeah, the love of God is on display in this marriage, that cherishing kind of love. You think about how God speaks of Israel, you're my treasured possession. Among all the peoples of the earth, I treasure and cherish you, Israel. That's the same kind of affection we see here when Solomon speaks of his bride, cherishing his bride. That's a good observation. How about the second one? We touched on this a little bit already, but how does the book point to Jesus? First question, is it a metaphor for Jesus in the church? What do you think? I mean, yes and no. Or no and yes. Maybe I'll answer in that way. No and yes. No, that's not what Solomon intends by the book, but is marriage a picture of Christ in the church? Yes. And so as Jeff pointed out, that sacrificial love within marriage does point to Christ. And so while the book itself, it's really about marital love, it also points beyond itself to Christ because the institution of marriage does point to Christ. How about the last question? How do we see the story of salvation in this book? how would I give you what I got for these? So, Song of Solomon. God is the author of the gift of marriage. Marriage is intended to illustrate Jesus' love for the church. So the book points to Christ when it points to marriage beyond itself. So we got to take 2 steps to get there. But how do we see the story of salvation? Every blessing we enjoy, including and especially marriage, is a gift from God. Every good thing, every blessing is a gift from God. And so even in a fallen world, he's created things like this for us to enjoy. And so every blessing that we see, whether it's a sunrise or a Chick-fil-A chocolate shake, it's a blessing from God, meant to be enjoyed with gladness. And so don't believe the lie that sometimes people, we'd call them ascetics, would say you need to discipline your body and you can't have any joy in life. It's got to be stern discipline. There is a sense in which we want to be disciplined. Doesn't mean we can't enjoy the good things God's given us, and marriage is one of those good things he's given us. And so the God who created the world good has created blessings for us to enjoy, and they're to be received with gladness. So that's what we want to see from this book. Now for next time. So this is the final poetic book. So congratulations. Give yourselves a hand. You made it through the 5 poetic books. Way to go. You must be worn out from the poetic books. It was kind of weak. All right. Well, so next time, here's what we're doing. We're doing an intro to the prophetic books. Now, the first prophetic book we'll get to is Isaiah. It's a big one. And so if you want to start reading Isaiah ahead of time, you can do that. But what I want you to do is simply read the manual, pages 193 to 198. That's going to give you the lay of the land, because as we jump into the prophetic books, there's a couple features we want to point out for you so you're not lost when those key features show up in the text. But we're going to do the major prophets and then the minor prophets. And so we'll be marching through those. And I want you to take note, too. When you look in your manual, just turn to it now. Chart on page 198. I want you to tell me if you recognize that. If anyone you know recently has shown you that chart. You see that? Yeah, Pastor Mark used this on Sunday to help us think about the covenants. And so what you're reading pertains right to what Pastor Mark's preaching about on Sundays, thinking about David and the Davidic covenant and all those things. And so these things all connect and tie together. So I want to bring that to your attention, that this is all synced up together here. So intro to the prophetic books, and we're going to dive in together. We're going to see how Jesus is on display in those books. So would you pray with me? Lord, we thank you for this night. Thanks for the opportunity we have to open your word. And in your word, we see the beautiful gift and blessing that you've given to us in love, in both marital love as well as just the simple pleasures that we enjoy in this life. And so would you help us as your people to think about your blessings rightly and to enjoy them as you've designed for them to be enjoyed. And would you help us, Lord, through it all, to love you more as the giver of all good things. And most notably, you've given us the gift of your Son. And through your Son, we get to know you, the creator of all things. And so we thank you for that. Help us to cherish this. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.